Well, I'm from Valencia, Spain, and in Valencia we have a big tradition with wind bands. So any town will have their own wind band or a few wind bands, and of course in a wind band, the clarinet is having the role as the violin with the orchestra. So there's a big tradition of clarinet playing in Valencia because of the wind bands. That being said, my family, my grandfather was already a clarinet player, and then I have many of my uncles that they are clarinet players, and now little cousins. So it's around the family, and I remember like being 7 years old and wanted to play the clarinet. But since you asked that question, I would love to answer that question also with a story. When I was about 9 years old, my family asked me which instrument I wanted to play, and of course I said clarinet. And they said, oh no, there are too many clarinet players in our family, so you should pick another instrument. And I said to them, I want the clarinet. And they end up giving me a very, very, very old drum. It was like twice my age, that drum. And so I had to go and take percussion lessons with Professor Santiago. And I was a child, I was a boy, and I didn't enjoy playing percussion. I have nothing against percussion.
Sure.
But I didn't want to play percussion. And so I managed to drive the teacher crazy. Crazy. And so I remember that book saying like left and right, and you had to do all those combinations, rhythm combinations. Hello, Catherine. Please.
Hello. Sorry about rehearsing. Keep going.
And so I managed to do the opposite. And around the second, third lesson, he said to me, Jose, how are you doing in school? And I lied to him. And I said to him, I'm not doing well. I'm under, I said, like in Spanish we call it educación especial, like special education, like when you have like some person helping you. That was all a lie.
Sure.
And he's like, okay. So then my dad came, and Professor Santiago said, I would love to have a word with you. He said, I don't think your son can be a musician. He has no musical coordination. He should do something else. And of course, you tell that to my dad, or my family, they're all musicians. It was a catastrophe. So I remember my dad being on the car. He didn't say much on the car. And just like 20 minutes after on the car, he's like, Jose, what am I gonna do with you? And they said, Dad, give me a clarinet. So that happened until I would say like about 10 years later, I was studying by then in Philadelphia, and I got asked to perform a concerto with the Valencia Symphony. And it was the first time I played the symphony. And I played a very difficult clarinet concerto. It's called Nielsen Clarinet Concerto. Really hard. So I went to the rehearsal, and I started playing, and there's this little section when the clarinet has a solo with the snare drum. And they turn around to look at the snare drum. That was Professor Santiago. So after the rehearsal, you have like a bunch of musicians coming talking to you, and I see him coming slowly again towards me. I'm like, oh, I see where this thing is going. So he comes, I'm like, and he's like, oh, Jose, you remember who I am? I'm like, sure, you're Professor Santiago. And he's like, oh, I'm so happy to know how well you're doing, blah, blah, blah. I have a question. I'm like, okay. And he's like, what the heck happened to you? So that was my
I didn't say at the beginning, but I get the gist that you pretended that you were not good at something.
yeah, because
and
they
then
want to
you
they
didn't
give me
want to-
percussion. Right?
Yeah,
They want
percussion,
to
yeah,
play
clearly.
So that's as soon as I started playing the clarinet, I was like, it's like when I always compare this, and I say that an analogy. It's like Harry Potter finding his wand.
Mhm.
How do you say that?
Wand.
Wand.
Yeah.
It's like that's the one. That was my wand.
Yeah.
The clarinet. Well, clarinets are not like violins. Violins are very complicated to get and find. And very expensive to find a violin. With clarinet, I probably owned 80% of the brands of the clarinets that I make around the world, and I wasn't happy with most of them. So I decided to work with my teacher that was working with a clarinet maker in Vancouver, Canada. So for now will be like 12 years we've been designing and developing our clarinets. So I'm really happy with. I use my clarinets are different than many of the clarinets out there because first of all clarinets are made of granadilla wood. It's a wood, dark wood that comes from Africa. Before it used to be ebony, but since like 10 years ago or more, ebony is you're not allowed to cut ebony. So the makers they have to switch to another kind of wood.
Mm-hmm.
That wood, I wasn't happy at all, granadilla. So we started experimenting with different woods around the planet, and we found this beautiful wood. Actually, the company that I play the clarinets, it's called Backun, Backun. They started experimenting with cocobolo.
Mm-hmm.
Cocobolo, it's a very reddish kind of wood that it comes from Mexico. And what I experienced with that wood is that the sound of the clarinet was very resonant, had lots of timbre, was dark, and was very smooth. And I like those qualities. So after that, that's when they started working with the keys. Instead of having silver keys like any other clarinet, what happens if we have golden keys? So it adds more to the sound. What happens if the dimensions of the clarinet in this part are like this? So we started working like that, and my clarinets are constantly changing, constantly developing, and not only the clarinets, but also the mouthpieces and the reeds and the ligature, what keeps the. So it's like a race car in a way that you have to be always updating, and to me to do that, I find it so stimulating because you are constantly like every few months it's something new that you put on the clarinet. That's something that violins cannot. It's
not
very
even,
fun.
no,
Maybe
it stays the same.
a
Strings,
bow,
you
but-
experiment with
but-
strings.
I guess similar to a violin in the sense that, like with the violin, your clarinet is everything is vibrating when you play. So any change you make will affect the sound.
Yes.
And similarly with a violin, any changes you make to the chin rest, even the pegs, the tailpiece. Yes, certainly the strings, the bridge, the fingerboard, anything you change will
Everything.
change the
With
sound,
it-
because the whole thing is a system that's
Once we-
vibrating. Does that happen in the clarinet world, Jose, that people would seek out older instruments? and not-
It can't happen because with the clarinet it's so important the dimensions of the internal bore, and with your saliva it's acidity. So while you play that clarinet, acidity is like opening that board. So for instance, like the clarinets that I use right now, that I see them like as a piece of art. I love them. I had never loved some clarinets like the ones that I have right now, but I know that my B flat, for instance, that's already 3 years old. In 2 years or less, I will have to start looking for another one.
I see.
The good thing is that since I work with the company, we keep developing them.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna get something much better
It's
than
very
what I have right now.
collaborative, and that's exciting.
So it's not like, oh, I have to start trying and here and there to see if no, I'm sure that when I say, okay, now it's time for another clarinet, they've been offering already, you should have another clarinet. I'm like, not yet. I wanna wait because I think that mine right now is on its peak, and maybe in a few years it's gonna go a little bit down.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so I'm gonna.
That's
Thank you.
fascinating. That's fantastic for you to know that when you go looking for something, there will be something even better. And you don't have the headache of a big search for something
Yes.
that's very hard to find.
And then on the opposite side, there are like musicians, like clarinet players, that they played all their life with the same clarinet and with the same mouthpiece.
Really.
Mhm.
What happens? That they change. So when they go trying other instruments or other mouthpieces, even if they are trying the same model,
Mhm.
because their mind is set to a mouthpiece that is already too open or a clarinet,
Mhm.
they can't find any other instrument.
That's it. So they
Uh-huh.
So they have to stay always with the same. So
I think you got to move with the
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, there's an interesting parallel there with string playing, where, for example, a bow ideally should be straight, not twisted. It should have an even curve. But very often you'll see people playing fantastic old bows by wonderful makers, and these bows will be bent and twisted. And, you would look at this bow and think this should not work